October 5, 1951. The night before the biggest game of his career, Joe DiMaggio's phone rang and he received an offer that would test everything he believed in. "Joe, this is Howard Hughes. I'll pay you $1 million cash right now. Just have a bad game tomorrow." Joe's response shocked America's richest man and revealed why he became a legend both on and off the field. This is the story of the biggest bribe in sports history, the man who thought he could buy Joe DiMaggio's integrity, and why Joe's response created the most famous rejection in baseball history. October 5, 1951, 8:30 p.m. Joe DiMaggio was in his hotel room at the Commodore Hotel in New York, preparing for Game 6 of the World Series against the New York Giants. The Yankees were leading the series 3-2. Tomorrow's game could decide the championship. Joe knew it would probably be one of the last games of his career. Joe had been thinking about retirement for months. He was 36 years old, his body was breaking down, and he was tired of the constant pressure of being America's most famous athlete. His knees ached every morning. His back was stiff from years of diving catches and powerful swings. The doctors had warned him that one more serious injury could end his career permanently. Joe had spent the evening reviewing game film and talking strategy with his teammates. The Giants were tough opponents, and tomorrow's game would require his absolute best performance. But he wasn't prepared for the phone call that would change his life. The phone rang at exactly 8:30 p.m. "Joe DiMaggio?" "Yes. Who is this?" "This is Howard Hughes. I need to speak with you immediately. Can you come to my suite right now?" Joe was surprised. Howard Hughes was the richest man in America. He owned airlines, movie studios, and defense contractors. He was also famous for his secrecy and his obsession with controlling everything around him. "Mr. Hughes, what could you possibly want with me?" "The World Series is tomorrow. That's exactly what I want to talk about. I'm in the penthouse suite. Come up now." Joe was curious despite himself. Howard Hughes didn't make casual phone calls. If he wanted to meet, it had to be important. "How did you get my room number?" "Joe, I own this hotel. Are you coming up or not?" 20 minutes later, Joe knocked on the penthouse door. A large man in a dark suit opened it immediately. "Mr. DiMaggio? Mr. Hughes is waiting." Joe was led into a massive living room where Howard Hughes sat behind an enormous desk covered with papers and photographs. Hughes was tall and thin, probably 6'3" and 160 pounds. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes had an intensity that made Joe uncomfortable. The room was impressive but strange. There were multiple telephones on the desk. Stacks of cash were visible in corners. The walls were covered with photographs of athletes. "Sit down, Joe," Hughes said without looking up. "We need to discuss tomorrow's game." Joe remained standing. "What about tomorrow's game?" Hughes finally looked up with a stare that had intimidated Hollywood stars and business rivals for decades. "I want you to lose." Joe was stunned. "Excuse me? You heard me. I want the Yankees to lose Game 6. I want this World Series to go to 7 games. Why would you want that?" Hughes stood and walked to a wall covered with charts and betting sheets. "I'm not a fan, Joe. I'm a businessman. I have $50 million riding on specific outcomes of this World Series." Joe was confused. $50 million on what? "I don't bet on simple win or lose outcomes. That's for amateurs. I bet on complex statistical combinations, specific player performances, exact scores, precise timing." Hughes pointed to a chart. "I have $10 million bet on this series going exactly 7 games ending in the bottom of the 9th inning. How is that possible? When you have enough money, you can bet on anything. Bookmakers in Las Vegas, London, and Monte Carlo will take any wager if you can cover it." Joe was beginning to understand the scope of Hughes's operation. "I have another $20 million on specific batting averages and fielding statistics," Hughes continued. "If certain players perform within certain ranges, I make enormous profits. So if the series ends tomorrow, you lose money. I lose $20 million if the series ends in 6 games, but if it goes to 7 games with the right outcomes, I make $50 million profit. And you think I can control that?" Hughes shuffled through papers that appeared to be analyses of Joe's career statistics. "Joe, I've been studying your career for months. When you play well, the Yankees win 87% of the time. When you have an off day, they only win 34% of the time. Those are just statistics. Statistics are everything. You are the most influential single player in baseball. Your performance directly affects game outcomes more than any other athlete." Joe was impressed by Hughes's homework, but disturbed by the implications. "Mr. Hughes, this sounds like fixing games. I'm not asking you to obviously throw the game. I'm asking you to have a poor performance, strike out a few times, make some errors that could be explained as bad luck or pressure. And what do I get for this performance?" Hughes walked to a large safe and removed a heavy briefcase. He placed it on the desk and opened it toward Joe. The briefcase was filled with cash. More cash than Joe had ever seen. Stacks of $100 bills arranged in neat rows. $1 million, cash, right now. Joe stared at the money. In 1951, $1 million was an unimaginable fortune. The average American worker made $3,000 per year. Joe's Yankees salary was $100,000, making him the highest-paid player in baseball. This was 10 years' salary in one briefcase. $1 million to have a bad game? Correct. You strike out 3 times, make 2 errors, and you go home as the richest athlete in American history. Joe continued staring at the money. $1 million would solve every financial worry he'd ever had. He could retire immediately. He could buy his parents a mansion. He could invest and live comfortably forever. Joe thought about his future after baseball. He had no college education, no business experience. His only skill was playing baseball, and his body was wearing out. What would he do when his career ended? With $1 million, those worries would disappear. But then Joe thought about something else. The fans who would be watching tomorrow, 60,000 people in the stadium and millions more on radio, people who worked all week and looked forward to watching Joe DiMaggio play baseball. He thought about kids who collected his baseball cards and imitated his swing. He thought about teammates who had fought all season to reach this World Series. Most importantly, he thought about his integrity and what his parents had taught him. "Mr. Hughes, can I ask something?" "What? Why me specifically? Why not approach other Yankees players?" Hughes smiled coldly. "Because you're Joe DiMaggio. You're the player everyone watches. When you have a great game, it inspires the entire team. When you struggle, it affects everyone's confidence. So you need me specifically." "Exactly. I've approached other athletes before, but I've never found anyone with your level of influence. Without your cooperation, my entire strategy fails." Joe was curious and horrified. "You've done this before?" "Of course. How do you think I've made so much money? I've been influencing sporting events for years." Hughes walked to the wall of photographs. Joe looked more carefully and recognized some faces, athletes who looked guilty or ashamed. That boxer took $50,000 to lose in the 8th round. That jockey accepted $25,000 to finish second in the Kentucky Derby. Those college basketball players each took $10,000 to keep their scoring margins low. Joe felt sick. "You've been buying athletes for years?" "I prefer providing financial opportunities to talented individuals who might not otherwise have access to wealth. It's corruption. It's business. And you can be part of the most profitable deal of your life." Joe looked at the money again. $1 million. More than he'd ever dreamed of having. But then he thought about his parents, Giuseppe and Rosalie DiMaggio, who had immigrated from Italy with nothing and worked their entire lives to give their children opportunities. He thought about his father's advice. "Giuseppe, a man's word and reputation are more valuable than any amount of money. If you lose your integrity, you lose everything that makes you a man." Then Joe looked directly at Howard Hughes and said the words that would become legendary. "Mr. Hughes, you can keep your money. I don't care if it's 1 million or 50 million. I'm Joe DiMaggio, and Joe DiMaggio doesn't lose games on purpose." Hughes was shocked. In all his years of approaching athletes with enormous sums, no one had ever turned him down so definitively. "Are you insane? Do you understand what you're walking away from?" "I understand perfectly. I'm walking away from a bribe." "It's not a bribe. It's a business transaction." Joe headed toward the door. "Call it whatever you want. The answer is no." Hughes followed Joe, becoming desperate. $2 million. I'll give you $2 million. Joe didn't turn around. "Good night, Mr. Hughes." $5 million. $10 million. Name your price. Joe stopped at the door and turned back one final time. "Mr. Hughes, there is no price. Some things cannot be bought. My integrity is one of them. You're making the biggest mistake of your life." "No. Taking your money would be the biggest mistake of my life." Joe left the suite and returned to his room, where he spent 2 hours thinking about what had happened. He had just turned down more money than any athlete had ever been offered. He had walked away from enough money to change his family's life forever. Joe thought about his parents, who had worked their entire lives to give their children better opportunities. Giuseppe had worked as a fisherman, often leaving before dawn and returning after dark. How could Joe explain turning down $1 million? Would they understand or think he was foolish? But then Joe thought about what his parents had actually taught him. Giuseppe DiMaggio had always said that a man's word and reputation were more valuable than money. If you lose your integrity, you lose everything that makes you a man. Money comes and goes, but your character stays forever. Joe realized his father would be devastated if his son had taken money to lose a baseball game. The shame would be unbearable for a man who had worked honestly his entire life. More than that, Joe knew he would never be able to look at himself in the mirror again if he took Hughes's money. Baseball wasn't just a game to him. It was his life's work, his legacy, and his responsibility to millions of fans who believed in him. If he compromised that trust for money, he would destroy everything he had worked for. The next morning, Joe didn't tell anyone about Hughes. He went to Yankee Stadium and prepared for Game 6 like any other game. But something was different. Joe felt a clarity and purpose he hadn't felt in months. He had been tested in a way no athlete had ever been tested. As Joe put on his uniform, he thought about what this game meant. It wasn't just about winning a championship. It was about proving that some things in sports were still pure. His teammate Phil Rizzuto noticed Joe seemed more focused than usual. "You look different today, Joe. More intense. Just want to give the fans a good show. You always do. But today you look like you're playing for something bigger." Joe smiled but didn't explain. Every game is bigger than just winning. Every game matters. Game 6 began at 1:30 p.m. at Yankee Stadium. The stadium was packed with 61,711 fans, and millions more listened on radio. Joe came to bat in the first inning with 2 runners on base. The crowd gave him a standing ovation, not knowing that 15 hours earlier he had turned down the biggest bribe in sports history. The Giants' pitcher was Larry Jansen, one of the best in the National League. Joe worked the count carefully, waiting for the right pitch. On a 3-2 count, Jansen threw a curveball that hung slightly high. Joe drove the ball into the gap in right center field. Both runners scored easily, and Joe ended up on second with a double. The crowd went wild, and Joe felt a satisfaction no amount of money could have provided. This was why he played baseball, for moments when everything came together perfectly. In the 4th inning, Joe came up again with a runner on first. Jansen tried to challenge him with a fastball. Joe turned on the pitch and drove it over the left field wall for a 2-run homer that put the Yankees ahead. As Joe rounded the bases, he thought about Howard Hughes watching from somewhere, realizing his money couldn't buy what really mattered: the joy of competing honestly. In the 7th inning, a Giants batter hit a hard-line drive to center field that looked like it might fall for a hit. Joe raced back, leaped at the warning track, and made a spectacular catch that saved 2 runs. The crowd erupted, and Joe's teammates rushed to congratulate him. But Joe was thinking about more than a great play. He was thinking about how good it felt to earn this moment honestly. Joe had 3 hits, drove in 4 runs, and played flawless defense. The Yankees won 4-3 and clinched the World Series championship. In the clubhouse after the game, Joe's teammates carried him around while photographers captured the celebration. "Joe, you played like a man possessed," said Yogi Berra. "What was driving you?" Joe smiled but kept his secret. "Just wanted to give the fans what they came to see." After reporters left, Joe sat alone thinking about the past 24 hours. He had been offered more money than he'd ever dreamed of and walked away without hesitation. But instead of regret, Joe felt proud. He had been tested in the most difficult way possible and chosen integrity over financial gain. Joe DiMaggio never told anyone about Hughes's bribe attempt during his career. He kept the secret and never sought publicity for his decision. But the story didn't end there. 3 days after the World Series, Joe received an unexpected phone call. "Mr. DiMaggio, this is FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. We need to meet immediately. It's about Howard Hughes." Joe was surprised but not entirely shocked. He had wondered if someone might have been watching Hughes's activities. "How do you know about that meeting?" "We'll explain everything when we meet." 2 hours later, Joe sat in a secure conference room at the FBI field office. Across from him were Director Hoover and 2 senior agents. "Mr. DiMaggio, we've been investigating Howard Hughes for several years. We believe he's been systematically corrupting athletic competitions." An agent opened a thick file folder. "We had Hughes's suite under surveillance. We heard the entire conversation." Joe was relieved. He had worried Hughes might claim Joe had accepted the bribe, but now there was independent evidence. "How long have you been watching him?" 3 years officially. We started investigating when we noticed unusual betting patterns, large sums wagered on very specific statistical outcomes that seemed unlikely by chance. You mean he's been fixing games for 3 years? Longer than that. We believe Hughes has been influencing sporting events since the late 1940s, but he's careful, and most athletes he approaches accept his money. The agent showed Joe photographs and documents. These are athletes we know have taken money from Hughes: boxers, jockeys, college basketball players, even some minor league baseball players. Joe recognized some faces from newspapers. This is much larger than I thought. Much larger. Hughes has spent millions corrupting athletes. He has an entire network of bookmakers, gamblers, and fixers. What do you need from me? Your testimony about what happened in that hotel room. Your refusal is crucial to our investigation. Will my testimony become public? Eventually, if the case goes to trial. Joe had mixed feelings. He wanted to help stop corruption but didn't want to be famous for refusing a bribe rather than playing baseball. Can I ask one condition? I don't want this public until after my career ends. I don't want to spend my remaining time answering questions about Hughes instead of focusing on baseball. The agents agreed. Joe cooperated with the FBI investigation over the following months, providing detailed testimony about his meeting with Hughes. The investigation continued for several years but proved difficult. Hughes had been careful to avoid leaving direct evidence, and the athletes he corrupted were reluctant to admit they'd taken money. Hughes was never prosecuted for the bribe attempt against Joe, but the investigation revealed the enormous scope of his corruption activities. FBI documents later showed Hughes had spent over $10 million bribing athletes during the 1940s and 1950s. He had successfully fixed boxing matches, horse races, and college basketball games. But he had never been able to fix a Major League Baseball World Series because he had never found a player important enough who was willing to take his money. Until he approached Joe DiMaggio, and Joe DiMaggio said no. Joe's rejection of Hughes's bribe had a profound impact on his life and career that went beyond that single game. Word of Joe's integrity spread quietly through baseball circles. Players, coaches, and executives began to see Joe not just as a great athlete but as a man of exceptional character. Baseball Commissioner Ford Frick heard rumors about the incident and called Joe into his office. "Joe, I've been hearing stories about you and Howard Hughes. I can't get details because of the FBI investigation, but if what I'm hearing is true, you've done baseball a tremendous service." Joe never confirmed or denied the rumors, but their conversation led to him being offered a position as an integrity advisor after retirement. Joe's teammates sensed something had changed in him after the World Series. He seemed more focused, more determined, and more committed to excellence. "Joe was always great," said Phil Rizzuto years later. "But after 1951, he played like a man with a mission. We never knew what, but we could feel the difference." Joe DiMaggio announced his retirement in December 1951, just 2 months after turning down Hughes's bribe. Though his decision was primarily based on his declining physical condition, the Hughes incident confirmed his belief it was time to leave while his reputation was intact. In his retirement speech at Yankee Stadium, Joe said something that took on new meaning for those who knew about Hughes. "I've always believed baseball is more than a game. It's a sacred trust between players and fans. When you put on the uniform, you're making a promise to give your best effort every time. That's a promise I've tried to keep throughout my career, and it's a promise that can never be broken, no matter what anyone offers you." Reporters didn't understand the deeper meaning of Joe's emphasis on integrity, but his words became one of the most quoted retirement speeches in baseball history. After retirement, Joe could have made millions through endorsement deals, but he was extremely selective about which opportunities he accepted. The experience with Hughes had taught him that money wasn't worth compromising his values. Joe turned down several lucrative offers that he felt might compromise his integrity. A cigarette company offered $500,000 for advertisements, but Joe refused because he didn't want to encourage young people to smoke. A gambling company offered $1 million for him to be their spokesman, but Joe declined because of his experience with Hughes and the dark side of gambling. "Every time someone offers me money to do something that doesn't feel right, I think about that night with Howard Hughes," Joe told his business manager. "If I can say no to $1 million to throw a game, I can say no to anything that compromises my values." This became known in sports marketing as the DiMaggio standard, the idea that an athlete's long-term reputation was more valuable than any single paycheck. In the 1960s and 1970s, Joe became a mentor to young athletes, teaching them about integrity and character in sports. One of his most famous talks came in 1975 when he spoke to rookie baseball players. "Someone will always try to offer you money to compromise your values," Joe told them. "The question isn't whether the offer will come. The question is what you'll do when it does." Joe shared the Hughes story for the first time publicly during that speech, nearly 25 years after it happened. "I was offered more money than I'd ever dreamed of having. All I had to do was play badly, for one game. But I realized that if I took that money, I wouldn't be Joe DiMaggio anymore. I'd be someone else, someone I couldn't respect." The young players sat in stunned silence. "The money would have been gone eventually," Joe concluded. "Spent on houses and cars I didn't need, but my reputation and self-respect would have been gone forever. That's too high a price for any amount of money." Word of Joe's speech spread throughout baseball. Soon coaches and managers were inviting Joe to speak to their teams about integrity. In the 1980s, Joe began working with the FBI as an unofficial consultant on sports integrity issues. His experience with Hughes made him valuable in helping identify potential corruption. Joe helped train FBI agents on how to recognize and investigate sports corruption. "The key is to remember that for every athlete who says no, there are 10 who say yes," Joe would tell the agents. "Your job is to find the ones who said yes." When Joe DiMaggio died in March 1999, his obituary mentioned his rejection of Hughes's bribe as one of his most important accomplishments. "Joe DiMaggio hit safely in 56 consecutive games," the obituary read. But perhaps his greatest achievement was saying no to $1 million bribe that would have compromised everything he stood for. Joe's funeral was attended by athletes, celebrities, and politicians, but the most moving tribute came from Little League players who had heard Joe speak about integrity. "Mr. DiMaggio taught us that being a champion isn't just about winning games," one young player said. "It's about winning the right way." Today, the story of Joe DiMaggio's rejection of Howard Hughes's bribe is taught in ethics classes and business schools across America. The DiMaggio standard has become a reference point for discussions about integrity in sports and business. At the Baseball Hall of Fame, there is now an exhibit about integrity in sports that features Joe's story. The exhibit includes a replica of Howard Hughes's briefcase filled with fake money, alongside a quote from Joe, "Some things cannot be bought. My integrity is one of them." Joe proved that some things truly cannot be bought. He showed that doing the right thing is more valuable than any amount of money. In a world where athletes are often criticized for caring more about money than their sport, Joe DiMaggio's example stands as a reminder that character matters more than cash. October 5, 1951, Howard Hughes offered Joe DiMaggio $1 million to lose a baseball game. Joe's response, "Some things cannot be bought. My integrity is one of them," created the most famous rejection in sports history and proved that America's greatest baseball player was an even greater man. Sometimes the most important victories happen off the field, and sometimes saying no is more powerful than saying yes. If this incredible story of integrity and character moved you, subscribe for more untold stories of how famous people faced their greatest moral tests. Like this video if you believe Joe DiMaggio made the right choice by turning down the money, and comment below, what would you have done if someone offered you $1 million to compromise your integrity? Next week we're revealing another story of how a sports legend chose honor over money when everyone expected them to take the easy path. Remember, your reputation is built over decades but can be destroyed in a single moment, unless you have the courage to say no when it matters most.